Let's take up this last question. You know, they have a economic policy which, you know, you can follow in Syriza's speeches and even in the political statement I was reading, which is oriented to greater value added, especially in the development of resources. So there was a lot of investment in mining, some of it's still going on, and they want greater processing of it inside Greece. They want a more value added in agriculture. Nothing's new, given this is the oldest policy in Greece. And you know, they want to target particular types of agricultural policies that would play this role. But even, you know, if one did that, and obviously, it's not only for welfare expenditure and minimum wages that they want the cushion of not paying interest on the debt. They want it for public expenditure. And that involves a construction center, building materials, that kind of stuff. Does that amount to the kind of thing that would make Greece, you know, export competitive, and even if they had to go back to the drachma viable with a massive devaluation, something which they would have to do, obviously, and they're determined not to print drachmas like toilet paper. So that's what they've got. I think one would have to hope that they can get enough breathing room that they can engage in some forms of directing of whatever liquidity's in the banks, and whatever breathing room they would have by way of a fiscal surplus after increasing the minimum wage and bringing people back into public employment, to, you know, get growth going through direct infrastructure spending, which hopefully would not be on the same basis as, you know, building a highway through the Peloponnese from Germany, which, you know, is the type of strategy that, you know, it's, but at the same time, Syriza says, and it's understandable, what developing country wouldn't say this? We need foreign direct investment. So I don't have an easy answer for this, and I think that's a fair question that one would probably have to ask of any government, however serious it was, about structural reform. And I can't, what I'm impressed by is the strength of the commitment to not pay interest on the debt and to renege on their memoranda and reintroduce a minimum of what existed before. And I'm very impressed by the commitment to take the banks into the public sector, but they may be taking a shell into the public sector. You know, were they to get elected, there would then be again a run of capital outside of Greece. I think one of the things they're going to have to do in order to make this viable is actually to introduce capital controls within the European Union and threaten Europe to throw them out. There's nothing that prevents a sovereign state inside Europe reintroducing them. It's decentralized enough, right? Yeah. Germany and France are constantly, when it suits them, not keeping to the 3% fiscal limit of a deficit, right? So they could try it. And I think they'd have to, because as soon as they get in, unless they completely cave, there will be a danger of a capital flight. Okay? Now, you know, this relates to the KKE question, to the question about policy from the left. When I was there in between the two elections in 2012, I was sickened to see that the main KKE demonstrations in Syntagma between the two elections were oriented against Syriza. That was their main point. Don't vote Syriza. I looked at their literature, had it translated for me. That's what they were handing out. People exiting when I was there from the subway station. I was even more sickened because KKE has no policy in any, because they aren't entering the state. I mean, they've got 6-7% of the vote now. Yes, you're absolutely right, they can pull out 100,000 people. They still have amazing capacity in that respect. But they can't enter the state. So their main role is to try to prevent Syriza entering the state. At least in the run-up between the two elections. I don't mean in terms of what else they do. Antarsya had a very, very impressive critique of trying to say, this is the far left party, which got, what did they get in the second round? 1%, 1.5%, you know. And they were determined to run against Syriza. But they had a very intelligent critique of Syriza trying to stay in and do what needed to be done. And instead they had a plan B. And the plan B was on the day of election, they have to be ready, right? To put people into the central bank and into the finance ministry that would immediately introduce capital controls, introduce exchange controls, and give themselves the space to do this. And it wasn't that I was all that critical of that. I thought it was incredibly irresponsible for them not to be camping outside of the leadership of Syriza's door, saying, if you get elected, this is what you're going to have to do if you're serious, right? Rather than running an election and get 1% of the vote. It just seemed to me, it's what Ernie says about the dynamics of class struggle and parliamentary elections. And Antarsya was not expecting Syriza. The point is that the far left, most of our left, we have a good critique of social democracy. We understand that insurrectionary politics are very unlikely to succeed in any modern capitalist state. But in terms of what we put forward, we do not have mass support. We simply, and in that sense, we're not really revolutionaries, not effective revolutionaries. Right? So when a party of the left committed to turning the banks into public utilities, speaking explicitly not only of an anti-neoliberal program, right, but of one that requires mobilization, further mobilization of the masses, and you're running against it? I mean, what world are you living in? At least you need to be a militant inside it, at that moment. Yes, and if the balance of forces inside that party and in the Europe that it will face is such that the party leadership caves, which is not unlikely, then it may be the time to leave. So you can continue to be an educator, a mobilizer, try to get to the point that you develop such capacity. But it just seems to me it's not worldly. It's otherworldly to be doing this when you so badly need to try to enter the state and you have a party of the left with mass support. And that's without using any terms like sectarian, and which, you know, some of them deserve in any case. But I don't know whether how much that answers about the KKE or other parties to the left of Syriza. And I'm not sure the KKE is to the left of Syriza because of its nationalism of a certain kind, you know, as we know. Okay. A very good question was this question of, if they do bring the civil servants who've been laid off back, will they not be doing what Bassak did? You know, rebuilding the clientelist state. And again, we shouldn't pick on Greece. There's virtually no state in the Mediterranean region, including the Middle East and North Africa, which was part of the Ottoman Empire that ever developed a Weberian rational bureaucracy. I mean, every single one. I mean, really, it's not the Greeks, you know, as the Germans say, in their racist kind of way. But it's a very good and difficult question. And all I can say is that in my experience, there have only been two sets of party activists that I've ever known in studying European parties. A little bit different in Latin America, but only two that I've known that have put such emphasis on changing public administration, on democratizing public administration, on having the type of public administration that is democratic and accountable, etc. And that is the people I talked to in Syriza, and that was the people around Tony Benn and the British Labour Party. The only two that I've ever come across. That's not to say that they're the effective power. The Bennites weren't the effective power in the Labour Party, and I don't know whether they are in Syriza, but there are more of them around in Syriza, and it's found in the Syriza language. And I have to tell you, one of the things that makes European social democracy think that Syriza is unreformable, not, you can't make it into social democrats, is that it has language about supporting and mobilizing a subversive movement. You know, they look at that, and these guys are thinking, you know, they're crazy. They're crazies, or they're unreliable, etc. They like the Italian Communist Party, because the Italian Communist Party is now to the right of the American Democratic Party. And it uses reform in the sense of neoliberal reforms, right? Explicitly. That's what Renzi is doing. So, but I think what you're asking, the opportunities to, the dangers of opportunistically going back are there. And that if you don't do that, then you'll also get blamed for not doing it. You know, I think it's clear that, from what people tell me, that there's already a lot of jockeying inside Syriza of a clientelist kind. And not just by people who've recently joined from PASOK, but from people from many of the elements inside Syriza who are jockeying for their personnel, either to get on the European list or to become candidates in the elections or to get appointments. You know, one needs to expect this and introduce institutional barriers against it. And I don't know that Syriza has them. The party branches question is really important. Yeah, I think I can understand being cynical about the way PASOK used, because it did have party branches. It was a real oil party machine with centers everywhere. The goal on the part of people who would like there to be an active party of the type Michalis was talking about is not to have that type of apparatus, but to have the type of apparatus that, and I saw it too, what you were describing. You know, every Friday night in different parts of Athens or Piraeus, you could see between the elections, just people coming out, dancing, talking, listening to hour-long speeches. It was a politicized environment. And if that could have been linked up, and in some places it was, to old Synaspismos branches, in an effective way, that would have been wonderful. It looks like, just as Michalis was saying, what I heard as well, that's not happening. So, the military, I think, is a very good question. I don't know. One of the explanations I heard for why the crackdown on the leadership of New Dawn took place was that they were trying to show to the senior personnel in the police department and in certain parts of the military that they couldn't look the other way while significant elements of the military, and especially the police, were facilitating the growth of New Dawn, right? So it was a slap in the face to the leadership of the military for looking the other way and letting them do that, right? So there was some attempt in that sense to put some control over the state, over that portion of the state that was supporting fascist elements. I don't think Syriza wants to think about, as somebody said, what the hell will happen if they do try to see through a socialist program with the military. You know, that's so far down the road in a way. But it would come into play. But, you know, it would come into play in any state. I mean, Greece, you have to think about it because of what happened, obviously. but it would come into play in Canada if we ever got strong enough. And then finally, how much room do they have with 18 neoliberal governments in Europe? And that's the real thing. It's not just a matter that Brussels and Merkel, it's that, Greg writes about this more than anybody, that, whether they're social democratic governments or not, they are following a neoliberal strategy, reflecting the balance of forces in which financial capital is very powerful, and in which portions of the working class are integrated into it. It has to say that, in terms of their dependence on financial capital for their pensions, etc. So that's the main question. That said, Syriza's argument is that there is a crisis of legitimacy in Europe, that the austerity policies are visiting such pain and are being so unsuccessful, as you can see in France, that it's producing a crisis for the mainstream party and the mainstream governments. And France is the most important case where could be a breakdown. It looks like in the European elections that the National Front will be the leading party. What does that say about the socialists, right, and their party crisis? One of the people that came and was on the final panel with me and Syriza and the former Icelandic finance minister was a dissident member of the European Assembly from the Socialist Party, not from the Communist Party or the far left. They were the Popular Front. So they're banking on there being enough of a disruption in other parts of Europe that if Syriza comes forward with a rational program supported by the European left parties in a unanimous way, that they might find some support in elements of European social democracy. It's a long shot. It's a long shot. But I think they're right to say it is irresponsible not to try.
That's right.
Just to protest doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, well, what can I say? I'm not sure how to close this, just to say stay tuned. I think interesting things will keep happening in Greece, most likely. Thank you very much for the good night.